a very important aspect of his life was the privilege and the honor to be able to come before the throne of God and worship. When we read Psalm 120, a psalm many of us are familiar with, at least this portion. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go to the household of God. We were to study that text historically. It is likely that there had been 10 generations that had not had the privilege to worship God. It's likely 10 generations. And so when afforded the privilege to be able to make their presence before the throne of God again, they were utterly glad. They were excited. God has removed the curse, the condemnation. He's allowing us once again the privilege and the opportunity to come in his presence, and I was glad. They were on their way to Jerusalem. Those psalms are called the songs of ascent. Seems to be psalms that they're singing on their way to Jerusalem. Psalm 121, as they are looking toward the hills, from whence does my help come? They do not acknowledge that their help comes from the hills. They just happen to be journeying to Jerusalem and they're looking toward the hills. It's highly likely that as they're traveling, they see all these idols on these mountains, all of these images of various gods. And they're walking as they're excited about going to worship. Man, it's probably been 10 generations, and we have not had the privilege and the opportunity to come before God and to be in the presence of him and his people. And they are excited, and they looking, and they singing as they go on. And where does our help come from? Does it come from the hills? No, our help comes from God, and we're going to Jerusalem to worship him. And I'm glad, they say. One of the most important elements of their lives was the privilege of worshiping God with his people. There was another aspect of their lives that was equally important. And their enthusiasm for worship likely came out of this desire. In one letter, this is not in your Bible. It is a historical document written by a man by the name of Aristaeus. It's in what we would call the Old Testament pseudepigrapha writings. And he wrote a document, or rather he had a desire to go and study the Jews. He wanted to know about them, he wanted to know about their law, and he wanted to know about their God. He wanted to know about them, their law, and their God. And in writing to this gentleman that he wrote this information to, he says to this gentleman, Aristaeus says to a gentleman by the name of Philocrates, he says, for I perceive that you possess a natural love of learning, a quality which is the highest possession of man, to be constantly attempting to add to his stock of knowledge and acquirements, whether it be through the study of history or by actually participating in it. It is by this means, by taking up into itself the noblest of elements, that the soul is established in purity. And having fixed its aim on piety, the noblest goal of all, it uses this as its infallible guide, and so acquires a definite purpose. Let me summarize that. To this man, he communicates, you love to learn. You love to learn. You have one of the highest qualities that a man could ever possess, desire to learn. But not only learn, you actually have a desire to practice what you learn. You don't just want to know it, you want to do it. And the reason you want to know it because you want a definite purpose in life. You don't want to walk through life carelessly and unconsciously, uncertain about anything and certain about nothing. You want a definite purpose. And so, therefore, you will fix your mind on learning. But of the Jews, he would say, as he would go and he would meet one of the high priests, Eleazar, not the earlier one, but a later one, because this document is written later in Jewish history. It says, now our lawgiver, that's Moses, being a wise man and specially endowed by God to understand all things. So he took a comprehensive view of each particular detail. And the text says, he fenced us around with an impregnable rampart and walls of iron. In other words, he's talking about the law and the protective nature of the law. He says that we may not mingle. Listen, he said, here's why Moses, or rather God, gave us the law that he gave, not only to protect us, but also this, so that we may not mingle with any other nation, but remain pure in body and soul, free from all vain imaginations, worshiping the one Almighty God above all creation. Knowledge, worship. Hence, he says, the leading Egyptian priest looked carefully into many matters. That's Moses. And being cognizant, being mindful, being vigilant of our affairs, says, called us men of God. This is a title which does not belong to the rest of mankind, but only to those who worship the true God. The rest of men are not of God, but they are men of meats and drinks and clothing. Let that sit on your heart for a moment. They are not men of God, they are men of meats and drinks and clothing. For their whole dispositions or their whole purpose in life leads them to find comfort in these things. These things, meats, drinks, and clothing. Only thing that matters to them. They don't have a desire to learn, and they do not have a longing desire to constantly worship the Almighty God. They're not men of God, they're actually men of meats, drinks, and clothing. And in these things is where they find comfort. For them, God does not bring them any element of satisfaction. They only find that in meats, drinks, clothing. But he says, among our people, this is a Jew talking to Aristaeus. Among our people, these things are reckoned of no value. They mean nothing. Among our people. The only thing, the main consideration for our whole life is an aspiration for the sovereign God. Does that all make sense? This is the Jewish mind had this longing desire for both knowledge and worship. In any opportunity to learn and to bow, they took it. Why? Because we're men of God and not men of meats and drinks and clothing. We only find comfort and consolation in God. It's nowhere else. It's interesting that Paul in 2 Corinthians 1 would actually communicate that Yahweh is the God of all comfort. There is no consolation, there is no stability, there is no certainty anywhere else but in learning and worship. To not even fundamental, to primary qualities of the human: knowledge and worship. And I would argue that is something that we have not loved in a long time, for a long time, while at the same time thinking we're good with God, when our only desire is meats and drinks and clothing. That makes sense? The book of Romans, I didn't see any visitors. Book of Romans, chapter 3. There's a particular point I want you to get in this text. I want to give you the title of the lesson. It is Oh, What Love. Oh, what love. I'm going to seek to make that point abundantly clear from this text. One thing I often communicate to you is your need. Again, this is not an option. Is your need to have some working knowledge of the Old Testament literature. Some working knowledge. The gospel means nothing to you having no knowledge of that. I'm not just talking about the few passages that we are familiar with. I'm talking a holistic understanding of the documents from Genesis to Malachi or Nehemiah, however your clock operates. And without that fundamental understanding of that literature, which is called the Hebrew Scriptures, when I come to Acts chapter 2, to the gospel, it really means nothing to me. I really don't know that I need to be revived and I need to be living when I've never known I was dead. Now, you can tell me I was dead in trespass and sin, but if I've never tasted that death, I'm never going to seek life. See, when Peter preached and the other apostles in Acts chapter 2, when that message penetrated their hearts, there was at least 3,000 that changed today. Talking to Brother Newhouse earlier this morning, we were just talking, I was thinking about some stuff through the weekend, and I've come to a conclusion. I would like to be wrong, I just don't think I am. Most people that will assemble today anywhere and in any church are not at all concerned about making any modification to their life. None. Most people. Now, there is that element that are actually like those noble Bereans, and they're actually trying to listen to be made better, so that in the process of they're not just listening to the apostle, but taking what the apostle said, evaluating and sifting it through heaven to determine whether or not these things are right, and therefore coming, believing. Now, that's not just a mental activity. That's a change in movement. That's a change in life. And most people that assemble on this day are not at all assembling because they are looking to modify. As a matter of fact, because of the self-righteous nature that we have a tendency to possess, we oftentimes believe we don't need changes. I want to present something to you this morning from this text. And I want you to honestly consider it to determine whether or not I need to be more mindful of my spiritual condition. In chapter 3 of the book of Romans, what we do know about this book, and we have stressed this before, I want to stress it again, Paul has communicated in the first 2 chapters the overall condition of all humanity. And he's brought both Jew and Gentile to the forefront, and he is communicating that there is none righteous, no, not one. Now, when I look at that contextually, I have to look at that from the Old Testament perspective and recognizing in Old Testament literature that both the ethnicity of the Jews and the Gentiles receive the same indictment. They all say, Psalm 14:1, they all say no to God. They have all, Isaiah 53, they have all gone astray, and every man has turned to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. While the whole world goes after meats and food and clothing, the pains of their death are on his back. And everybody, the entire world, every ethnicity, whether it be Jew or Gentile, God sets forth the demand, and the entire scope of humanity says no to him. That's essentially what Paul is addressing. Romans chapter 1, 2, and 3. Doesn't matter if you have the law or not. You fall under the umbrella of being a sinner. It doesn't matter if you are homosexual or a hypocrite. You got sin. It doesn't matter if it's unrighteousness or self-righteousness. You have a sin problem. It doesn't matter if you are racist or a fornicator. You have a sin problem. It doesn't matter if you are a convict or one who likes to cuss. You got a sin problem. It doesn't matter if you are a liar or you are lazy. You have a sin problem. It doesn't matter if you are one who doesn't worship or who doesn't worship in spirit. You have a sin problem. This is essentially the communication in Paul, from Paul through the Roman document. It doesn't matter the nature of your sin. It doesn't matter the particular sin. You got Jews, Gentiles committing homosexuality, but you Jews, you hypocrites. You saying don't commit adultery to others while you do the same. You saying it's wrong to worship this way, but you steal and rob from those temples. And the name of God is blasphemed because of Church of Christ folk. Well, he said Jews in the text. I just thought I'd make it practical before I deal with it exegetical. And so in 21 of chapter 3, now the righteousness that the Jew and the Gentile is after is not in self-righteousness and is not in law of any form. None. Any form. But is in Jesus. So if you want to be right with Jesus, with God, you have to have him. Period. I can't brag or boast in anything that I do, because when it came to terms of salvation as a Jew, I can't offer enough bulls. I can't give enough animals. I can't tithe enough. I can't come to the temple enough. I need something other than that. As a Gentile, it doesn't matter how moral I am. Without him, and so the indictment is on the back of God. But Joe, you get the first scripture, please. Exodus 23. I want you to see a few things in the Old Testament, and we're going to come back to Romans 3. I'll give you this verse. No, let's go through a few verses. I want you to see something. And I want you to hopefully allow it to settle in your mind. You don't just listen to me. You actually think about what the text actually says. It says, you shall not pervert the justice due to your needy brother in his dispute. Keep far from a false charge, and do not kill the innocent or the righteous. The last thought is what I want. For I will not acquit the guilty. Now, I want you to, that's the last thought. That thought in Deuteronomy, Exodus 23. God says, in judging righteously, God says, I will not acquit the guilty. Now, that's the thought I want you to get in your heart. I want you to think about this. God said, I will not acquit the wicked, the guilty. Everybody in here guilty. Whether I was a hypocrite or a homosexual. Whether I was a liar or lazy. Whether I'm a convict or a cursor. I have a problem. And there's a side of me that says, or rather there is an aspect of me that's guilty. Guilty. But from Old Testament literature, what I began to learn is God constantly communicates. We're going to look at a few passages, not all the ones I gave Brother Walker, but some of them. I want you to get this in your heart. God is communicating and dealing with people righteously. He says, I will not acquit the wicked. Why in the world am I still living if God says I do not acquit wicked folk? There is a reason you and I still live. Even though theologically God never, and he does not, Nahum 3:1-3, you don't have to go there. Nahum 1:3, God never, even though he's long-suffering, even though he's merciful, he never acquits the wicked. Always deal with wicked people. You got to ask the question, why am I still living? Because I've done something that should have condemned me a long time ago. Why am I still living? See, it's not until you, and see, you got, you have to have a longing knowledge, a longing desire to understand what scriptures mean. Not just be able to read them and quote them. But a desire to understand God. You want to quit the wicked. What's my next? Go to next verse, 25 of Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 25, please, sir. Verse 1 says, if there is a dispute between men and they go to court and the judge decide their case and they justify the righteous and condemn the wicked, then it shall be, if the wicked man deserves to be beaten, the judge shall the judge shall then make him lie down and be beaten in his presence with the number of stripes according to his guilt. Again, setting forth laws to deal with wicked folk accordingly. Go to Isaiah 5. That's the next one I want. I want to read this one. Isaiah 5. But notice throughout the Old Testament, what do you find? Guilty folk undergoing the necessary punishment for their wickedness. Throughout the Old Testament, God is communicating all through the Old Testament. I am not going to let the wicked get by with his wickedness. I'm not. Despite the fact that I'm long-suffering and merciful, I am not going to allow him nor her to get by with their guiltiness. I'm going to deal with it. In Isaiah 5, let me get over here. We started reading at verse number 18. He says, woe, verse 18, unto them that draw, woe to those who drag iniquity with the cords of falsehood and sin as with cart ropes, who say, let him make speed, let him hasten his work, that we may see it. And let the purpose of the Holy One of Israel draw near and come to pass, that we may know it. Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. Woe to those who are heroes in drinking wine and valiant men in mixing strong drink, who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away the rights of the righteous ones who are in the right. In other words, you're calling evil good, and you're calling good evil. When it comes to judging the wicked, you give them a pass. But when it comes to the righteous folk, that's the one you condemn, because you have a mindset that says that good is actually evil. We're so passive in our behavior, we don't like to deal with evil when it needs to be dealt with. I don't want to judge nobody. Let folk die and go to hell because we don't want to address it. As we mentioned here Wednesday, it takes courage to hold up the word of God. I have learned and am learning not to be scared of what God said, and I don't care how you may receive it. Jesus demands the loyalty that is connected to his work on Calvary. Justifying wickedness. Oh, God understands your heart. And he does. He understands it's wicked. And he understands you scared to deal with the wickedness. So what do? You justify it. You call it good when it's evil. A lot of our ignorance and a lot of our statements we make does not flow out of biblical literature. We don't know the Bible. And so, back to Romans 3. So I just want you to get the point that, hey, here we are, God, in at least 3 passages we've looked at, he does not, will not at all acquit the wicked. Now, in Romans chapter 4, now let's look at something. I hope this is making sense. I told you last week I'm studying biology, and it's difficult to process. The reason it's so difficult for me to process is because I don't have a working knowledge of biology. Had I had a working foundation, fundamental understanding of biology, man, it's been over 20 years, 25 years since I opened a biology book. It's been over 20 years. Now, I've heard people talk about cells and nucleuses and all that stuff, mitochondria, all that stuff, but I have no idea what I'm listening to. I have no idea what you're talking about. I don't know how all this stuff works. Cell membranes and endocritis, I don't even know how to pronounce all that stuff. I have no understanding of what I'm dealing with. None. And I had to come to grips with something. The same way I hear biology is the same way a whole lot of folk hear the Bible. You have no working knowledge. And so when I talk about the cross, you hear that as the same way I hear mitochondria. You have no working knowledge. Why? Because we don't have this longing, hunger, and thirst for it. I was reading a book here some time ago, and there was a gentleman that it took a 45-year window. Fortunately, he lived. He took a 45-year window. He said, I'm going to learn every language that the Bible is written in, every language. I'm going to learn it. I'm going to learn Hebrew. I'm going to learn Aramaic. I'm going to learn Greek. He also committed to learning German. And over a time span, over 15 years, he learned those languages. Over another 15 years, he studied the Bible in every one of those languages. And over the last 15 years, he's going to preach and teach his findings. What's your point in saying all of this? Here was a man that at least committed himself to learning. At least 4 languages in a 15-year time span. Because he had a longing desire to know God. We can't get folk to read the English. In Romans 4 and 5, keep in mind what we just said. We just read in the Old Testament. But to the one who does not work, this is Romans 4:5. But to the one who does not work, but believes in him who, listen to the contradiction, who justifies the ungodly. Do you hear the contradiction? Y'all hear that? Here, ain't no contradiction in the Bible. Well, you just read one, didn't you? God said throughout the Old Testament, I do not justify the ungodly. But then Paul comes along and says he does justify the ungodly. Hold on, it can't be both, can it? It can't be both. God, you don't acquit the wicked. You deal with justice. You deal with the ungodly, don't you? Yeah. How in the world is the ungodly justified then? Explain that to me, Paul. I already have communicated how the ungodly is justified. How, Paul? Listen to him. Verse 25 of Romans chapter 3. He displayed Jesus as a propitiation. We talked about this last week. That is the mercy seat. That blood sacrifice God put out publicly. He allowed him to be brutally tortured. You want to know what your guilt is? It's on him. I appreciate Brother Love for this, even though it doesn't do it justice. We talked about the thorns a couple weeks that was in his head. Many of you, even in the back, can see that. That right there is about a 3-inch thorn. The thickness nor the length does any justice to what was in the head of the Messiah. Braided thorns. Guarantee you, I can't get now a person in here to stick this through their finger. Guaranteed. Pass it around. Stick it through your finger. He had multiple of these penetrated through his skull. And we have the audacity to want some cheap form of Christianity. My salvation wasn't cheap. That's just his head. Hadn't even gotten to his body. Torn with bone and metal fragments publicly for some ungodly folk that would not appreciate him. You don't find better love than that. Displayed him as a propitiation to demonstrate his righteousness. What do you mean? What do you do? Because in his forbearance, even though he doesn't acquit the guilty, he also didn't sufficiently deal with sin. And so as we've communicated before, man, God's name is on the line. God, what you mean? God, you hadn't dealt with the wicked folk. Well, I'm going to deal with them. And when I deal with them, I'm going to deal with them in such a way that I can not only deal with their sin, I'm going to be able to save them from the same. Because the same place I deal with their sin and justify myself, I'm going to send them to the same place. Where are you going to send them? Go look at my son who has thorns in his skull. Look at my boy whose back is torn asunder. Look at my son who's hung on a cross with 6-inch nails penetrating his body. Blood flowing down his face. His entire torso is torn to pieces. And you have the audacity to want cheap Christianity. Where then is boasting. You can't boast about nothing. but the fact that he gives you access to his son. In the book of Luke, let's look at a few more verses. The lesson will be yours. In the book of Luke, in dealing with the heart of man, he does throughout this section. Only want to read a few. I was going to read a few others, but I'll stop at a couple. In chapter 12, in verse 13, I think I have to do a lot of explaining the context to actually make this point. Verse 13, Luke 12 and 13. I didn't give Brother Walker these verses. Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher," he says, "tell my brother to divide the family inheritance with me." Folk fighting over inheritance. Folk fighting over a deceased loved one's stuff. Fighting. You want to get Jesus involved. Jesus says, "Hey man, who appointed me a judge or arbitrator over you? I'm not concerned about that stuff. Ain't my concern at all." See, you want to involve Jesus in your family affairs, but you don't want to present Jesus within your family. But when it comes to something that I need satisfied, I want to bring in Jesus. Jesus said, "Hey man, I ain't the arbitrator here. I ain't studying that stuff." However, there is something he's concerned about. Verse 15, then he said to them, "Beware and be on your guard against every form of greed." What's the issue? Jesus is beginning to uncover the heart of this individual who came to him fighting over mama's will. He greedy. For not even when one has an abundance does his life consist of his possessions. Y'all bear with me. I want to read a little bit. Bear with me. He told this parable, verse 16. Now this is on the foothills of dealing with greed and covetousness, and a person that believes his life actually consists of his possessions. Jesus brings forth some very interesting words here. He says, verse 16, the land of a rich man was very productive. And he began reasoning to himself, saying, "What shall I do, since I have no place to store my crops?" Then he said, "This is what I would do. I would tear down my barns and build larger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, soul, you have many goods laid up for many years to come. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry." You see, there it is again. Drinks, food, and clothing is always associated with wicked folk. Always. You know why? Because that's the only thing they're concerned about. Drink, food, and clothes. That's it. That's all they worry about. That's all that consumes their mind. That's it. They don't have any comfort if they don't have stacks in their account. See, poor folk know how to be poor and feel rich when I got Jesus. Now, see, the problem with humanity, we don't like to be poor. But I can think of some time, man, and I mean this literally. I'm not illustrating. I can remember times I had not a dollar in my account. That's not metaphorical. That's real. Not $1. Broke down on the side of the road. Got to call my daddy to send me some money. This was over 15 years ago. I'm still waiting on that call back. Now I was able to call somebody, but I'm still waiting on my daddy's call. My daddy knew a lot of my problems were my own fault. But the Laodicean, not the Laodicean congregation, the Smyrna congregation, Jesus said, I know you poor, but you're rich. I brought the illustration up to say this. In all of my times, even in my midst of poverty, I do know there was a constant reality. I never went hungry. Never went hungry. I never lacked what I needed. I just couldn't swipe my debit card. He says, read with me. This man says, after he's built this empire, man, what am I going to do? Man, it's time to retire. So you know what I'm going to do? Man, I got all this stuff. I'm going to build me some big barns. Put all this stuff in my big barns. And after 65 years, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to say, so, look at what you got. Look at what you've accomplished, soul. Just look at it. Good stuff, right? Rich, man. He can retire. Now he can be faithful to the church, right? Nah. If you ain't been faithful 65 years, you're not going to be faithful for 5. Not in your same mind. Nah. You're going to sit down, now it's time for grandbabies. Ah, man, we're going to Disney World. Man, what Sister Sheila did this week, man? She took them grandbabies to Florida. Man, they just left California last week. Where's she worshiping at? Well, you know, I saw them at Disney World on Sunday. She ain't worshiping? Nah, man. She said God understands her heart. But God said to him, verse 20, you fool. Now, Jesus said that. You fool. You illiterate numbskull. That's how we would say it. That wasn't very nice, was it? I know it. But that's what Jesus said. This very night, your soul is required of you. Now, listen to what he says. Now, who will own what you have prepared? Everybody in here know. Everybody in here know that when you die, you can't take your stuff with you. Everybody know that. You work all them years to get this stuff. You can't take it with you. But that's not the sad portion. It is in the next section when he begins to deal with how damning that condition is. And that he says, verse 22, Verse 21 says, so is the man who stores up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. He says, for this reason I say to you, don't worry about your life as to what you will eat, nor for your body as to what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. God went so far to say, look at the nature. Humans, you worried about food. Look at the birds. Watch him. For they neither sow nor reap. They have no storeroom nor barn, and yet God feeds them. How much more valuable are you than birds? You don't think you have more value than a bird? They just fly and go eat. But see, man, I got to retire. Got to make sure stuff is established. Got to make sure I got a good foundation. Jesus, man, why are you consumed with that stuff? And which of you, by worry, can add a single hour to his lifespan? If then you cannot do even a very little thing, why do you worry about other matters? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, but I tell you, not even Solomon in all his glory clothed himself like one of these. He says, but if God so clothes the grass in the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the furnace, how much more will he clothe you, you men of little faith?